Why should we change? Is working fine? Well, fine won't get you to where you might need to go and where the young upstarts who could eat your lunch will go.
Hey everyone, you're listening to Superwomen. Today's guest is Natalie Nixon. She's been dubbed the creativity whisperer for CEOs. If you feel blocked creativity-wise, she teaches you some frameworks on how to think about being creative and how to actually put those creative ideas into action to grow your company.
Organizations are organisms. They are inconsistent. They're imperfect. I think it's kind of hilarious that we still are trying to make this sort of an algorithm for perfect outcomes.
I meet a lot of people who are great at business and they're like, but I'm not creative at all.
There's a difference between art and creativity. It's not something that only artists are great at, but the best CFOs, plumbers, teachers, executive assistants, attorneys, etc. are super creative. It's my perspective that creativity is not a nice to have, it's a must have. Creativity is your ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. My goal is to help them optimize that creativity for strategic advantage.
I'm Rebecca Minkoff, and this is Superwomen. Each week, inspiring women are interviewed to uncover the unexpected journeys, the challenges, and the unwavering spirit that makes them powerful. Get ready to be motivated by stories of resilience and discover the keys to unlocking your own potential. Natalie, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to dive into your method today and so excited to chat.
Thanks for having me, Rebecca. It's good to be here.
You know, you're known as the CEO whisperer. At least from the research I've done online and helping transform companies with a different method of approach. Business culture is a struggle. It's a founder's number one complaint, people. And I'm curious to dive into, what inspired you to go into this realm, and then we'll take on your approach after.
Yeah, well, I developed the tagline of the creativity whisperer to the C-suite because the lens that I use to help leaders consistently innovate is through this lens of creativity. So I'm a creativity strategist, and I help leaders leverage creativity for strategic advantage because it's my perspective that creativity is not a nice to have, it's a must have. It's not something that only artists are great at, but the best CFOs, plumbers, teachers, executive assistants, attorneys, etc. are super creative. And my goal is to help them optimize that creativity in a number of ways. And when you talk about people being the pain point for so many leaders, is kind of ironic because whether you're selling widgets, gadgets, or services and experiences, at the end of the day, it's people who are consuming those goods and products and services. And the other thing we often forget is that organizations are organisms, and they're organisms because they're made up of humans. And because they're made up of humans, they are inconsistent, they're imperfect, they're not predictable. And I think it's kind of hilarious that we still are trying to make this sort of an algorithm for kind of perfect outcomes rather than lead into the process, which can be messy at times, can be imperfect. And that's where building your creative capacity really is essential so that you can have a much more integrative approach that is much more adaptive.
What even made you want to enter this sphere, and how do you even get training for it, if I'm being honest? Like, how do you even come to that sort of space?
So my entrance into the sphere has been really loopy. I have a background in cultural anthropology. I worked in the fashion industry and global apparel sourcing for a division of the Limited Brands. Before that, I started my hat design business in my 20s in New York City. It's called, wait for it, Nat's Hats. And you as someone who is an iconic entrepreneur in fashion know that people who've never worked in fashion think it's either glamorous or frivolous, and it's neither. It is a business. And fashion really taught me the value of trend, the value and role of beauty and desire and aesthetics in connecting to consumers in a meaningful way. There's a lot that healthcare and tech and financial services can learn from the ways that fashion builds business and connection with consumers. But because I worked in sourcing, I lived and worked in Sri Lanka and in Portugal, traveled throughout Asia, I learned about the business of fashion tremendously and the role of logistics and technology. So that's something I brought forward into my work. Having studied cultural anthropology is the gift that keeps giving because you learn how to ask questions. You learn to be very observant of people. I got tired of living and working in different time zones from family and friends and said yes to an opportunity to become an assistant professor at what is now Thomas Jefferson University. Ended up being an academic for 16 years. In the first 10 years, I taught the business of fashion. In the last 6 years, in the middle of that last, unbeknownst to me, chapter of my academic career, I gave a TEDx Philadelphia talk. And in that talk, I was proclaiming that the future of work is jazz. I give that talk and it catapults me into getting invited into companies to advise, consult, facilitate, speak. And I'm doing so much of that. That's how I got to the stage of making up my job title as a creativity strategist and doing the work I do now of helping people understand that creativity is a strategic competency.
So let's get into some of the brass tacks, because I feel like I meet a lot of people who are great at business and they're like, but I'm not creative at all. And you come in and you say, no, it is about creativity. So give me a couple of use cases of someone who feels they aren't creative, where you would come in and open up that creativity for them. Because I'm like you, I believe everyone can be creative. And I always tell people like, well, I'm not an artist like you. I'm like, but there's an art there's an art to running a business. There's an art to being a leader, even if it's not a drawer, right? Or a sketcher or whatever.
Yeah. So there's a difference between art and creativity. Artists are exceptional at wrestling with the ambiguity of the creative process. So when you talk to designers or artists and you ask them like, well, where is this all leading? Like you go to a work in progress at a studio or you meet the choreographer after a dance performance and they'll very calmly and happily say, I don't really know. I'm still leading into this. And so that is a big distinction about the way, first of all, artists are trained on their own or through education to lean into, err into process rather than what is the answer. They are very much more open to that. But when I, for example, I've been hired by a C-suite team of attorneys at a global law firm to help them answer the question of how might we normalize curiosity in our work culture. When you think about people who were on a corporate track, they've been rewarded for having the answer for leaning into certainty. And then when they arrive on the battlefield, it feels like sometimes of work in the marketplace, there's a lot of gray. Another example is I worked with a team of leaders at Google who internally were at a real crossroads organizationally and kind of were at an identity crisis. They had been through a lot of shifts and changes and needed to understand what their purpose was. And so I took them through a process of identifying what their true north is. Because in my view, while we want to have a roadmap that tells us when to go left and right, if I equip you with a true north compass, you are much more able to adapt to all the changes that are ahead. And that process really was about getting grounded in 3 deceptively simple questions. What if, so what, and now what? And what if helps you to get really blue sky and big picture in your thinking, to get to that divergent thinking. You physiologically feel differently when you ask that question, what if, right? So what is the element of rigor that is really important. The so what forces you to put a critical lens at everything you've just dreamt up and really challenge your assumptions about what's possible. Now what is a hybrid of the what if, which I call the wonder dimension, and the so what, the rigor dimension. And now what can be very rigorous, like as in what is our very next first step? Brass tacks, what's it going to cost? How much time should we dedicate to it? Who are the people that we need? But now what can also be like, now what, right? It can also be that wonder. So what I'm hinting at is when I go in and work with teams, I am really equipping them with my wonder and rigor method, because creativity is your ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. So that toggling between wonder and rigor is something that we see artists do exceptionally well. So we assume, okay, that's creativity. But when you think about the best engineers and accountants and educators and farmers and teachers and plumbers, etc., are toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And I also zoom out away from the specific examples, Rebecca, and give you what I call the business ROI of creativity and how it shows up. The reason I say that there is not a fuzzy dotted line between creativity and business results, but a solid bold line. I'll give 2 examples. When we commit to being more creative, to toggling between wonder and rigor, to designing space and time and systems and processes that help us to do that, we must have much more inventive thinking. We must have much more big picture thinking. We have to step away from, well, we've always done it this way, or why should we change? It's working fine. Well, fine won't get you to where you might need to go, and where the young upstarts who could eat your lunch because they're scrappier will go. So when you have much more inventive thinking, you begin to identify new products, services, and experiences delivered to your clients, and that unlocks new revenue streams. That is a business result, going from inventive thinking to new revenue streams. Another example is that most of us really don't like to collaborate because we say, I can do this by myself. Why do I have to bring these people in? However, long term, when we collaborate, because we're bringing in different skill sets, our assumptions are challenged, we increase productivity. When productivity goes up, efficiencies go up. And when efficiencies go up, costs go down. So there's a direct line between collaboration and cost cutting long term. So those are just two examples of the business cases when we commit to creativity the way I'm talking about in terms of this wonder and rigor work.
Hey everyone, sorry for the quick pause. I want to share something really exciting. Superwomen has a brand new YouTube channel. It's still under construction, but big things are coming in 2026. You'll find past episodes, new episodes, and some bonus content I cannot wait for you to see. Just search Superwoman Media on YouTube and hit subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Okay, back to the pod. Do you think that money has a play in keeping creativity down? And I'll give you a real life example. I would say for the last 2 years, my marketing and PR budget and experiential budget has been almost zero. And everything I did was done with rubbing sticks together, coming up with totally wild and out of the box ideas and creativity. And when I got the budget this year and it was increased by, an amount I haven't had in 2 years, I felt paralyzed. And I felt like, now what do I do? Now the pressure is on. Before there was no pressure because I had nothing. So it was almost like, oh, you did something awesome. And now I'm like, well, now how do I spend it? And now what do I do? And I literally couldn't come up with I had to go to ChatGPT to help me come up with something.
Well, first of all, congratulations. Good news, bad news, right? Yeah. So what you're talking about when we have something like a greater budget, a higher budget. Yes, the sandbox feels bigger all of a sudden. However, creativity loves constraints. Creativity loves constraints on time, on budget, on people resources, because those are the moments where you're forced to think very differently, to use your words and ask for help, to in a humorous, self-deprecating way, say, I really don't know what was next. I know what I'm doing, but let me try, right? These are the conditions that really help us to prototype more often. And what's a prototype? A prototype is a rough draft, ugly mock-up. In my business, I use the words in my company, I'm constantly running experiments. And when I use that language psychologically for myself, it's taking the pressure off. There's 3 possible outcomes of an experiment when we have to be scrappy. One outcome is, yay, it worked. Yay, me. It's great. I learned something, it worked, and life moves on. A second outcome of an experiment is it failed. But when we use the word experiment, it's a softer blow because experiments should fail. That's how we learn, right? I'm from Philly, the home of the Eagles, and our quarterback, Jalen Hurts, likes to say there's winning and learning. He ears away from saying winning and failing.
I say when you learn. Yeah.
Yes. When you're either winning or you're learning, and hopefully you're always learning, right? So that prototyping experimental mindset, the outcome could be, yay, it's a win. B, okay, it failed, but what did we learn? And C, here's this little thread that is emerged that we didn't see coming. And where does that lead us to, right? We want play money. We want bigger budgets. And I think the lesson here is all of us have to tap into something I call your inventory of courage. All of us have chapters in our lives and the growth of our businesses where we're at our wits' end. We weren't sure if the next big idea was going to work or where our next client was going to come from. And we need to tap into that reservoir of courage and grittiness and scrappiness to carry us through even during those chapters when we do have the best team and a great budget and phenomenal success, so that we don't lose our je ne sais quoi that got us to where we are.
I mean, I feel like you see it over and over again. A company gets to a certain size and then they lose that ability. And then, like you said, this is the way it's always been done. I just listened to a podcast this morning where Stephen from Diarisio calls it like the paper wall syndrome or problem where, oh, I can't do that. That's just why. Why can't you do that? Well, that's just the way it's been done, and it stops that. So now you have a big company. How do you get them to get their creativity and scrappiness back? Because sometimes you don't want to let go of the things that make it a little cushiony now that you've been there.
So one important thing to do is, and it kind of is full circle back to the top of our conversation, Rebecca, is that you always have to make sure that you're plugging in people who have a very different skill set than you have. You have to make sure that they're young. There's some young people, a lot of young people who have different training from you. So that's one thing, people you're surrounding yourself with. Second thing, the context that you're putting yourself into. So a big piece of advice I like to give people is to always be a clumsy student of something. And that could be in your personal life, but also your professional life. How many conferences do you go to where you're learning something new? If your organization can't afford to send people to a different sort of conference, what about webinars where they are tapping into an industry that they know nothing about? And then the call to action is to return to the team and share what you learned. Are they doing something that they have kind of similar parallel problems, but they're approaching it very differently? How can we adopt that? So that learning mindset professionally in design thinking, we call it lateral thinking. What can we learn from near and far adjacent areas? So if you work in fashion, go to an agricultural technology conference. What do you learn? If you work in higher ed, go to a conference that's all about finance on Wall Street, if you work in philosophy, whatever, it's to really interrupt the patterns that we wire in our brain about the ways that we think. The other piece about being a clumsy student is literally on a personal level. Where in your life are you not the smartest person in the room? Are you really bad at something? So for example, we had friends visiting town and we went bowling, and I am a horrible bowler. I also crack myself up. I have a lot of fun with it. I learned from my husband, who's a great bowler, and other our friends who are much better bowlers than me. I learned tips. I learned how to take instruction. I learned how to laugh at myself. I'm also 5 years now, I've been consistently a student of ballroom dance. In ballroom, I must learn to follow. Arguably, I'm not the best follower all the time in my life. I like to think of it, but in ballroom, I learned to open my mouth, use my words, and ask questions, even though if it sounds stupid. I learned to be much more comfortable being experimental. I learned to follow my intuition, to get out of my head and into my body, which is still a lifelong process for me. What we do when we are clumsy students of something in both our personal lives and in our working lives, and bring those lessons back to the team, is that we are rewiring the neural pathways in our brain that help us to show up to work very differently, to help us to get more comfortable being challenged, to help us to get more comfortable with being in a learning mode. So the short answer is make sure that you put people around you and put yourself in contexts and situations where you can be in that learning modality.
I love that. I used to ballroom dance and I had so much fun with it. And it was very, very, very hard for me to follow. So what's a sign, if someone is listening and they're an executive, what is a sign that they should look for? Or the red flag someone should be like, they're blocked, they're stuck, they're not, they're always just going to look at the numbers. Like an example is when we had private equity investment, he was just basing every single decision on the spreadsheet in front of him. He would look at the spreadsheet, did the number go negative, decision made. And so I'm just curious, what are your red flags that people should be on the lookout for?
Well, ideally, we have to start with a true north, right? Which is, what are my values and what makes sense for me in terms of how I want my business to look, feel, sound like. And when we have that clarity, when we start to deter from that, or someone else on the team is, that right there is the red flag. So first of all, it's a clarity on what makes sense for me and my business. So the things that make sense, I'll just talk personally for me, figurative thinking. My values are around curiosity and discipline, play, and also integrity. Then I do what I say. And then work with people who do what they say. I work with people who ask questions or aren't afraid to ask questions, that we add in elements of play to the ways that we work. So having that clarity on what my true north is really important so that you can sense it. And speaking of sensing, pay attention to when that like, oh, this isn't quite feel right. So then the next thing is, well, how do you have those conversations with people? And I actually default back to a form of feedback that I learned when I was a professor. There's so much and I didn't mention this, but I was also a middle school English teacher for 5 years in my 20s.
Wow.
And arguably that chapter of my professionalization, if that's a term, has served me the best for everything I've gone on to do, because middle schoolers can smell blood a mile away. They teach you how to have a sense of humor about yourself. You must be able to think on your feet, all the things. So anyway, But I learned, especially in my years as a university professor, how to give feedback. And what I would love to share with you and your listeners is, and if this makes sense for hard conversations, is this framework of I like, I wish, what if. So always starting with the positive. I really like the way that you are just adding value to this process, because you have a very different type of beautiful brain than I have. You're able to get to the numbers, and that is so helpful to me because that's not my strength. And it really helps me to see my business really clearly in that way. Right? So we start, I like. I wish is the soft critique. I wish I understood why you just stop there. I wish I understood why you're not factoring in maybe more the human element that I've always discerned as I've been building my business, right? So that is a question. Pause, have the conversation, and you're critiquing though without bashing them over the head. And then the what if can be a collective thing of like, what if we try to do a combination of those things? What if we went to this event together, and you can kind of get a sense of how I'm thinking about it? So what if I could join you on your next, whatever it is, right? But that's that framework of I like, I wish, and what if is I have found to be a really helpful way to have those kind of hard conversations where you're just like, oh, why are they doing it this way? You're like, so you don't lead with like the irritation and the critique, but it opens it up with questions and conversation.
I wrote that down. I have a call after this that I'll be applying that.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So speaking, going back to a little bit about your career, how do you navigate your own career, and how have you sort of built a structure around a very unique thing that you do? Because I think, someone might want to follow in your path or be someone who's a speaker, consultant, going into companies. And I don't know if you probably go into a company and you're focused on that, and then you peel your head out. When you're done, you're like, oh, I got to start the cycle over again and get a new gig. So I'm curious how you've shaped your own career so that you're able to flow with it or not.
As you've already discerned, it's been a very iterative process, which for the most part, I don't mind. And I referenced this moment when I was a sophomore in college. I didn't quite share what happened. So I was a sophomore in college, had my first world existential moment of what will I major in? And did not want to disappoint my parents. Called home. They listened to me go on and on about all the areas that I thought sounded impressive but didn't really interest me. And they found out, what are you interested in? What do you like? And I confessed that I loved these classes in cultural anthropology and Africana studies. And almost at the same time, my parents said, that's what you should major in. And I said, wait, what? That would be okay with you? And they said, yeah. My father said, Natalie, if you study what you love, you will have to turn down opportunities. Wow. And it was like this load lifted off me. And these were for two African-American, middle-class aspirational parents who had sacrificed a ton for our education. This is the 80s. This is the late 80s. I graduated college in 1991, where it was like study computers, right? And for them to give me that blessing, that permission to study anthropology, cultural anthropology, was just kind of bananas and radical in so many ways, and a blessing. And so I'm sharing that to say that I have sometimes, to their chagrin, I have always followed my heart, and I have always paused when I need to listen to what's next. So interestingly, I'm at a stage right now and my revenue model, my business model, where I am leaning into building my own sort of intimate masterminds and events so that my product offering, my product and service offering isn't exclusively you see me on stage giving a keynote or you read one of my books or you're taking one of my courses. So right now we're also launching more micro courses, companion courses to my books. And I'm realizing I'm kind of going back to me. To my core, I am a teacher. And part of what this yearning will answer for me in these micro events and these exclusive masterminds are ways for me to be of service to people in a much more high touch environment that is highly curated, that is deeply meaningful, that is helping people with this goal of helping them get unstuck, shifting their business model, all through the lens of building this capacity for creativity, all through the lens of talking between wonder and rigor. So I really try to practice what I preach by building in micro retreats for myself throughout the year. It helps me to reinvent. It helps me to do a pulse check. It helps me to get into learning mode. I always gift myself one personal development experience and one professional development experience a year. Again, I'm a nerd. I love ideas and learning. So I'm always figuring out ways to learn something new and or learn a different approach to what I think I have mastered. And I studied dance since I was 4 years old. I started Horton Technique modern dance and but you did? Oh,
Yeah.
Horton?
Yeah.
Not Graham? Wow. Go flat back and contractions and releases. That's awesome.
I did
Right?
Graham. I went to Alvin Ailey for a minute. I thought I'd be a modern dancer as my career. And so that's where I did Graham, but I trained only in Horton Technique. That's no
Beautiful.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never got into Graham it was just too much thinking. I'd flowed more with flat backs and contractions and laterals that Horton gets. That's amazing.
Yeah. I also feel like my pelvis, I could never do an arabesque. Like my pelvis never could contract or it just doesn't, it's not as flexible. So Horton was great for me because it was the flat back and I was like, that's all I need is a flat back.
The flat back. And yes. Oh, that's awesome. The always building in time and space to pause, to regroup, to ask for help. I was on a call this morning with someone who we planned on doing some work together, but it was very, very generous and kind of him to give me some feedback from him. Our space is kind of overlap, but I asked for help. I asked for feedback. I asked for different ideas. I now have a business manager, which for me as a solopreneur is incredibly helpful to give me perspective to help. I am increasingly learning to hire people who complement what I do. Could I do biz dev? Sure. Have I done it? Yes. But to pay someone who that's what he's excellent at, that's what he loves to do, so I can spend my time doing what my sort of beautiful brain is excellent at is great. So scaffolding my business with people who are complementary to me has been a big learning, and it's been a way that I know that will help me to scale.
I love that you say that. I love that you call it scaffolding. I feel like that's my superpower is I know when I'm like, oh, I need to hire for that. Or I need to hire that out. I'll think to take something on and I'm like, oh, I don't have the bandwidth. Great. I can hire that piece.
Yes. That was not my superpower. It was coming from a place of fear to not hire someone. And I remember it's probably a year and a half in. I know I keep referencing John, my husband, but I work from home. So he will see me a lot working on stuff, but I was probably 18 months into building Figure Eight Thinking, peeked his head into my office and he was like, Dave, I kind of feel like probably there's someone you could hire to help you do some of this. And I was like, no one can do what I do. But it was coming from a place of fear because I was like, I don't even know how I'm doing this. That means I would have to create a system and unpack it and give it language. And that takes time and work. Do I have the time to do that? Yes, you do. And as soon as I did that, it freed up time in my day and in my head to get to do even better work. And it's gotten easier and easier to ask for help, to hire the help, to be able to grow and scale and scope.
I love that. So if you're listening, it's time to get creative. Where can people follow you, find out about the courses, and get some of your magic?
Yes, thank you. They should go to figure8thinking.com. That's FIGURE, the number 8thinking.com, where the first thing to do is to sign up for the Wonder-Rigor newsletter. It's a monthly newsletter with all sorts of great tips and tactics. Also on that website of Figure 8 Thinking, they can see some of the new courses that we're launching. And to follow me on LinkedIn, Natalie Nixon on LinkedIn, and then on Instagram, Nat W Nixon. Those are the best places to start.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on today. Thank you for giving hope to the people that don't feel like they can be creative because they're only business or finance brained. And those are the people that can probably have the most fun figuring the what if.
Yeah, and a lot of them already are. They just don't have the language that I can equip them with. So thank you so much for having me, Rebecca. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks so much for watching today's episode. Before you head out, I want to invite you to my brand new YouTube channel for all things Superwomen. It's a fresh space I'm building out for 2026, packed with past episodes, future episodes, and some special new content we're cooking up. Just search Superwomen Media on YouTube and subscribe so you're there for everything coming next. I'll see you over there. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed it, take a second to rate and review the show wherever you're tuning in. It really helps others find the podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at Rebecca Minkoff and at RM Superwomen, or for a slice into my personal life at Becky Minkoff. And don't forget to check out my book, Fearless, The New Rules for Unlocking Creativity, Courage, and Success. See you next week.